About 2 or 3 months back, I did a video highlighting a trio of authors that I thought deserved some recognition. Ones that aren't talked about enough or given enough attention. The video did quite well for my small channel size, so I thought with that, this time I'd find 5 authors that people might be interested in, using a few suggestions from some of the comments. I also would like to apologize about any audio issues. I've been trying to mess with my audio in each video I make, and for some reason it always comes out really low, really quiet, and I'm not exactly sure why. I've tried fixing the audio in Audacity, and I've tried boosting the audio. I'm not sure if it is the mic I'm using or I'm talking too quietly. I'm not exactly sure. So yeah, this is the audio I'm working with, and I apologize about that. I would also like to apologize for the slow and inconsistent upload schedule. I'm about to graduate with my bachelor's, as well as working 2 jobs, so it's really difficult to find the time it takes to research, read, write, film, and then edit the videos into completion. If you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like, subscribing, maybe sharing it with someone else who might be interested, and let's get into the video. Brad Johnson. This one was suggested to me by this commenter who knew the writer personally. The comment was as follows. Brad Johnson, 1952 to 2011, was a black gay poet with a varied life but limited publication. I knew him as a shipmate when he served in the U.S. Navy, 1981 to 85. He became HIV positive in 1986, and by 1994, he had full-blown AIDS. I was working with a black conceptual artist who was interested in his life and work, but was disappointed that Brad was something of an icon to her. She was only involved in her own opinion of Johnson, not who he really was. I would like to see my friend's work printed in a volume, and his story brought into a larger audience. His reply. To be honest, I only have my military memories, which I shared on tape with the Philly conceptual artist, Tiana Nekia McLauden, and they are based on long conversations Brad and I had over 40 years ago. Brad shared few of his poems to his shipmates due to the homoerotic nature of his work. The ones I've read were decades later from various anthologies I found online. He wrote in free verse and the English ones. While I don't really care for the form, I do like the messages the works portray. TKM said his papers, in which both English and French were stored in NYC at the Schomburg Center of the New York Public Library. Living in Oregon as I do, I doubt I will ever visit them. I have seen that photographs I took of Brad from 1982 are being used in various online profiles. If nothing else, I would like to see a Wikipedia profile of him, made to separate Brad from a white, straight university professor poet of the same name. Thank you very much for your time and effort on this matter. At first, I wasn't really sure I'd be able to find his writing, and if I had been able to, I wasn't sure I'd be able to convey his friend's life and writing as well as he would have liked. As you can tell from his inclusion in this video, I decided to go forward and highlight Brad. While he was born in California in 1952, Brad would spend most of his life in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where he would graduate from Yale University in 1980. In 1981 to 1985, he would serve in the Navy on the ship the USS NASA, where he would meet and serve alongside the commenter that led me to him in the first place. In 1986, Johnson would be diagnosed with HIV. Johnson published in a few magazines and anthologies in his life, including Essence and In the Life, a black gay anthology edited by gay rights activist Joseph Beam. Johnson's publications stopped around the early 1990s. It was around this time as well that Johnson's HIV would progress into AIDS. Johnson would sadly pass away of complications due to AIDS in 2011. In an article titled Uncovered on Brad Johnson plus Tiana Nekia McLauden by Stephen G. Fullwood would have this to say on his last meeting with Brad. Quote, in March 2011, I went to meet Brad in his Philadelphia home to pack his archive, along with publisher and archivist Lisa C. Moore, to be shipped to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, New York Public Library. Brad couldn't breathe on his own and was on a ventilator. I often found myself staring at the plastic in his nose while we talked about his papers, the bulk of it physical evidence of his prolific writing life. Sores dotted his arms, face and the back of his neck. When I hugged Brad goodbye, touching his spine reminded me of his skeleton. that we all have skeletons and that we rarely think about what they do. They support us and give us shape to our bodies and our actions. He told me that his doctor told him he had about 6 months to a year to live. Brad Johnson died May 1st, 2011, of AIDS complications. End quote. Joe Pachinko. Based in San Francisco and carrying along with the legacy of the beats before him, Pachinko, from what I could gather, was a man who was repelled by the idea of being one of the cool kids and rather made his own way, publishing multiple novels and books of poetry under his own Superstition Street Press. Of these publications, I read Geek City Apocalypso. The blurb for the book reads as follows. Geek City Apocalypso is a tragicomedy elegy to the lost love set in the grungy underbelly of turn of the millennium San Francisco. By turns poetic, blunt, and hallucinatory. A roller coaster meditation on life, love, and existence that takes you from Tenderloin residence hotels to corporate cubicle farms and back. A new kind of noir, a tough-to-put-down journal about romantic doom and absurdist, awkward attempts to live in a world that more often seems filled with idiots, assassins, and fewer good nights' sleep. As I read this, I realized Pachinko writes like a 21st century Charles Bukowski, giving vivid and disgusting descriptions of life in modern-day San Francisco. His protagonist, Frank, works menial jobs and keeps a full tank of anger and disgust at the world around him. The smell of the bathroom down the hall is enough to scare the shit back up your ass. How exactly did the bathroom get this smell? How do you get something to smell like that? Did they rub the walls down with canned botulism sauerkraut before or after the dead rat in the wall started to decompose? In the mornings, I sit in there holding my breath while shitting out all the Chinese instant noodles, the Korean instant noodles, the Japanese instant noodles, made in San Jose that I've been eating. Listening to the janitors out in the hall screaming Spanish into their walkie-talkies, running the vacuum cleaners up and down to wake the soon-to-be evicted, the notices taped to their doors, pay rent or quit. The rest of us has to move out every 28 days. It's illegal, but you have to sign the paper and agree to it, or they won't let you move in. After 28 days, you get renter's rights. Then they can't kick you out, raise the rent, switch your room, etc. So every 28 days, you have to drag your junk out of your room, leave it inside the front desk cage, check out, then check back in that night or the next day, depending on the hotel. The book isn't some perfect masterpiece, though, and Pachinko had very obviously been heavily influenced by Bukowski's writing style and the beats, but that isn't to say it's bad. It's a sloppy novel, but a fun, grotesque, and hilarious read. In one of the few articles on Pachinko that I could find was one published in a 2008 issue of Oakland's weekly-based newspaper, East Bay Express, by Dan Abbott, who paints a rather unflattering portrait of the writer. It was titled, From Trash to Treasure and Back Again, where Abbott expresses his distaste for a performance piece Pachinko performed. In the article, Abbott had this to say about the show. Quote, sadly, Pachinko himself was not quite as impressive. With roughly 50 people crowded into the tiny pizza joint, Pachinko seemed, well, kind of bored. He tapped makeshift cymbals and half-heartedly honked the dozen or so horns arrayed on a rack in front of him, and mixed things up by blowing lazily into a noisemaker, while 2 cameras captured everything. The audience, which seemed positively giddy before the show, got a bit antsy when, after 3 songs, he put down his sticks and refused to play anything more until someone bought one of his poetry books. The audience, gods help them, even cried for an encore. We drove for 5 hours, one couple in front begged. End quote. Regardless of what this Dan Abbott guy had to say on him, it seems Pachinko had many friends and writers who cared about and enjoyed his writing, among those being beat writer Lenore Candell, whose book Book of Love was republished under Pachinko's Superstition Street Press after being censored and challenged on its initial 1966 release. In a blog post by Michael LEMMiNO titled Joe Pachinko, A Lost Alien Being, When asked what experiences in life can make one a good writer, Pachinko replied with this, quote, "That depends on what you think is a good poet or a good writer. Any experiences are useless without some talent, and no one knows where that comes from. I would say that being an outcast in some way can give you a perspective that other people don't have. In other words, if you're unable to fit into society for some reason, physical, mental, etc., your experiences will be quite different from the norm, and this can give you other things to say about it." End quote. Sadly, this was all I could find on Pachinko's life, though in many other reviews of his books, his friends and relatives comment on how much they miss him. He passed away in 2017 at the age of 57, though the cause of his death I was unable to find. Anne Quinn. Born in Brighton in 1936 to a single mother after her father left the family, Quinn lived her life as unconventional as the novels she wrote. She walked with 2 middle fingers up at the realist movement popular during her time, and yet no one seems to mention her name or even reprinted any of her work until just quite recently. After attending the Covenant of the Blessed Sacrament and working multiple jobs around Brighton, Quinn would move to Soho in London, where she would start focusing heavily on her writing career. After multiple novel rejections and struggling to balance her secretarial work and her craft, Quinn would experience a nervous breakdown, the first of many that would haunt her throughout her life. During this breakdown, she was unable to leave her bed and experienced bizarre hallucinations. After visiting a psychiatrist, she was able to pull herself together just enough to be able to finish her first published novel, Berg. Her first published novel, Berg, was something out of the binary and won her a D.H. Lawrence Fellowship Award. Beginning with the line, "A man called Berg, who changed his name to Greb, came to a seaside town intending to kill his father," gives you a good enough insight into what you're in for before reading. A strange and ever-shifting Oedipal tale of a protagonist with a name just as unconventional as the writing you'll find within. It was around the time of Berg being published that she would also begin an affair with a fellow writer by the name of Henry Williamson, who was around 70-something years old. Williamson would even write about her as the character of Laurel Whistlecraft in the novel The Gale of the World. After Berg, she would write and publish 3 other novels throughout her lifetime, these being 3, Passages, and Triptychs. Each of her novels grew more disparate and less worried about narrative flow than the last. Her final novel, published during her lifetime, Triptychs, was, as the blurb reads, a story of a narrator fleeing from his #1 ex-wife and her new lover as they traverse a surreal American landscape. Like other writers on this list, sadly, she would meet a desperate fate. Quinn would die by wandering out to sea in the morning of August 27th, 1973, and drowning herself. After her death, there hasn't been much talk of her, aside from a few articles published here and there, as well as an adaptation of Berg with a movie titled Killing Dad. There has, of recently, been more republications of her work though, thankfully, and I hope, as these republications come out, that more people begin to read her, as I think she is fantastic. Breece Pancake. Born outside of Huntington, West Virginia, in a small town called Milton, Breece Pancake was born to parents Clarence Bud Pancake and Helen Fraser Pancake. Yes, that's really his last name. Breece's literary career was short, and while he only published about 7 or so short stories throughout his life, each one will leave a mark on you with one part Southern Gothic, another part disgusting, dirty realism. His literary career began early, publishing his first story, Keeper of the Flame, in his high school newspaper, and pushing onward with his writing from there. He would get much of his inspiration for his stories from the harrowing lives which surrounded the hills that he grew up in, spending time listening to the stories of elderly folk and the homeless who talked with him at soup kitchens. Author of a sparse 14 short stories, 12 of these will be published in The Stories of Breece Pancake posthumously. For the selection of the stories that I read, one of my favorites was Time and Again, the story of an old veteran farmer who secretly murders hitchhikers and then feeds them to his hogs. The cold air is the same, and the snow pellets my cap sifts under my collar. I hear my hogs come grunting from their shed, thinking I have come to feed them. I ought to feed them better than that awful slop, but I can't until I know my boy is safe. I told him not to go and look, that the hogs just squeal because I never kill them. They always squeal when they're happy, but he went and looked. Then he ran off someplace. I brush the snow from my road plow's windshield and climb in. The vinyl seats are cold, but I like them. They're smooth and easy cleaned. The lug wrench is where it has always been, beside my seat. I heft it, put it back. I start the salt spreader, lower my shear, and head out to clean the mountain road. The snow piles in a wall against the berm. No cars move. They are stranded at the side, and as I plow past them, a line falls in behind me, but they always drop back. They don't know how long it takes the salt to work. They are common fools. They rush around in such weather and end up dead. They never sit still and wait for the salt to work. Even though I didn't grow up in West Virginia, I did live in some rural areas and found myself relating to the environment and atmospheres that the characters in his stories found themselves in. After high school, Breece would attend West Virginia Wesleyan College. He would attend for about 2 semesters until he heard that his father was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis and quickly transferred to Marshall University, closer to home so that he could be with him. Staying around his family for a year until 1971, when, after a broken engagement, he would travel to visit his sister in Phoenix, Arizona, where he would stay with her for a year, traveling around visiting Mexico and other parts of the U.S. while he worked odd jobs. Eventually, he would return home and finish his degree at Marshall University, earning a BA in English. Upon earning his degree, he would begin teaching at a few military prep schools around Virginia, one of these being Fork Union Military Academy in 1974, where he would become close friends with a fellow teacher by the name of Matthew Head. The following year, Breece would write many of his most notable short stories, though he would also be racked with guilt later in the year. On September 8th of 1975, his father would die from complications of multiple sclerosis, and then just 3 weeks later, he would lose his close friend Matthew Head. The next year, though, would mark a change in life when Pancake's short story, The Mark, was published on the University of Virginia's publication, Ravenna. Due to this publication, and feeling much more confident in his dedication to his writing, he would attend a master's program in creative writing at the University of Virginia. Breece would find himself burned out and exhausted during graduate school, as well as feeling quite alienated around campus, mostly keeping to himself. Despite this, he began revising and cleaning up earlier short stories he'd written and would get published in multiple places, one in particular being the very famous The Atlantic. Just as he began to gain more publication and wider recognition in the literary world, Breece would begin giving away many of his personal items, as well as a majority of his guns, excluding one, a Savage model shotgun. The night of April 7th, 1979 would be a rather uneventful, aside from Breece and his girlfriend Emily going to the movies. The film they would see is The Deer Hunter, which, for the events that follow, is quite depressing. The next morning, Emily would attend Mass while Breece stayed home, citing a cold, though he would attend later at 3 p.m. Afterward, he would stop by Emily's house and tell her he'd take her to a job interview the next day. He would then drive home and drink some beers, leading to his next appearance at 6 p.m. A neighbor's girlfriend would come home, groceries in hand, and find Breece in their unlit kitchen, sitting down. After startling the woman, Pancake would try with uneasiness to explain to the neighbor that he had a drinking problem and a tendency to wander around. A half hour later, his landlady would knock on his door to tell him the cops were on their way to question him. After apologizing to his landlady, Breece would walk outside, kick up a folding chair under an apple tree, and end his life by self-inflicted gunshot wound, using the one gun he hadn't given away. Savage model under-over shotgun. I'm unsure honestly what to make of this story, as I only found one source for it, as most of the sources offered no details to his suicide aside from the very fact that it was the cause of his death. One of my favorite writers, Kurt Vonnegut, once wrote about Breece Pancake, saying, quote, "I give you my word of honor that he is merely the best writer, the most sincere writer I have ever read. What I suspect is that it hurt too much. It was no fun at all to be that good. You and I will never know." End quote. Robert Walser. Admired by such writers as Franz Kafka and Hermann Hesse, Robert Walser was a varied and unconventional writer who led a modest life, working dozens of working-class jobs, such as a butler as well as an office clerk. He also, like many of the other writers on this list, struggled with mental illness throughout his life. Authors of many novels, short stories, books of poetry, and plays, Robert Walser is sadly hardly discussed as much of those he was admired by and inspired, so I think he earned a spot on this list. Growing up in Biel, Switzerland, as the seventh of 8 children to Eliza and Adolf Walser. At a young age, Robert would lose his oldest brother to an unknown and sudden illness in 1884. It was this same time Walser would also be forced to quit school due to his father's failing business and the family's general financial situation around this time. It was after his brother's sudden death, when Robert was 16, after a struggle with depression, he would also lose his mother. It was around this time of the family struggle that Walser would take up an apprenticeship as a bank clerk and then a bookkeeper at an insurance office. He would also begin writing short stories, quitting jobs after he saved a bit of money so he could focus on his writing, only to take up another once those savings ran out. Robert wasn't the only one who had artistic aspirations, though, in his family. His brother, Carl, had been living in Berlin, making a name for himself as a painter, as well as a set designer in the theater scene. Publishing a few poems in a book, Robert would leave Biel to join Carl in Berlin, where he would publish many novels such as The Tanners, The Assistant, and Jacob von Guten. These novels told stories of amateurs and young artists trying to get by, working odd jobs as butlers and clerks. His first novel, The Tanners, told of a family of 3 brothers and a sister, who the reader follows on each of the family members' misadventures, stints of employment as well as unemployment, romances, and meetings over the course of about a year or two. Much of his inspiration for these 3 novels would come from Walser's attendance at a butler school and his job as a servant in a castle in Upper Silesia. It was these novels that would inspire Hermann Hesse and Franz Kafka, whose first short story collection was abashed by critics for being too similar to Walser's work. Though these 3 novels were looked at fondly, Walser failed to see any commercial success and left Berlin to return home to Switzerland. Then, by the end of the First World War, Walser's publishing would be over, though this didn't stop him from writing. His writing remained productive, but his financial situation remained the same. He lived on the verge of homelessness from boarding house to boarding house, hanging on to life with a bottle in one hand and a pen in the other. Estranged from his family and any hopes of publication, he would eventually have a mental breakdown and be admitted into asylum after asylum, where he would be diagnosed with schizophrenia. He would be admitted to his final home, an asylum located in Herisau, where he would spend the rest of his 23 years of life. His final day was on Christmas of 1956, where, as he took his usual daily walk around the facility grounds, he would suffer a heart attack and slowly fall among the snow, where the police would finally later find him. I know the writers on this list met tragic ends, but I don't want you to think that's what I want you to focus on. It's their writing that they left behind that we should all look forward to, and the contributions they gave, not only to the literary world, but what they gave all to humanity and the whole. It's all we can hope for, to add our own moment to the larger scope of everything else, before and after. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed this video. If you're new to my channel, I try to put out a video every other month, usually about literature or something similar to that. I'm pretty new to making videos, so forgive me for all of my mess ups, please. I'm learning very slowly, but I hope you enjoy, and maybe subscribe to my channel if you want. And thank you. My next video will be about video game tie-in novels, so stay tuned for that. I'm going to be covering one of the Elder Scrolls books and one of the BioShock books, so I'm pretty excited for that. I've been reading through also Five Nights at Freddy's book, so stay tuned.